When a Boeing 737 MAX operated by Alaska Airlines took off from Portland in 2024, it was supposed to be a routine flight, the kind that happens every single day without incident. But just minutes after takeoff, the ordinary was no longer ordinary. A door plug, a panel designed to seal an unused emergency exit, suddenly blew out of the aircraft in mid-flight. In an instant, the cabin depressurized, and a hole the size of a refrigerator yawned open to the outside air at 30,000 feet. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, passengers screamed, and personal belongings were sucked into the sky. Freezing wind roared through the fuselage as the pilots fought desperately to keep the jet under control. Surprisingly, the aircraft survived. Everyone on board returned to the ground alive, but Boeing's reputation did not. Within minutes, images of the shredded fuselage circled the globe. The headlines did not just describe an incident, they declared that there was a crisis. This was the company that built the 747, which was nicknamed the Queen of the Skies, and changed how the world traveled. Boeing had supplied the Apollo program, delivered fighter jets that defied American air power, and for decades, the company was the symbol of reliability in the air. Yet in that single terrifying moment over Portland, all of that prestige felt like it was slipping away. What happened that day was not just a mechanical failure. It was the visible symptoms of the many things that were beginning to go wrong in a company hollowed out by years of neglect, a safety culture in decline, and an industry watching in disbelief as one of its greatest names faltered. The day the door plug blew off was not the beginning of Boeing's downfall, nor was it the end, but it was the moment that the world could no longer look away. Boeing had lost control. Boeing was not always a name surrounded by crisis. For much of the 20th century, it was aviation's crown jewel. The company took its name from its founder, William Boeing, who in 1916 began building wooden seaplanes in a small boathouse near Seattle. These modest beginnings hardly hinted at the empire that would follow. The real transformation came with war. During the Second World War, Boeing became one of the backbones of American air power. It produced the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-29 Superfortress, bombers that helped define the Allied strategy. By the end of the war, Boeing's factories were churning out aircraft by the thousands, its name now synonymous with scale, precision, and victory. Those wartime successes laid to the foundation for the next era. With expertise, facilities, and global recognition, Boeing shifted into commercial aviation. It gave the world the 707, the first jetliner to shrink oceans into hours, and the 747, the Queen of the Skies, a double-deck marvel that carried more passengers further and faster than any airliner before. Boeing was there for the Apollo program, designing the first stage of the Saturn V rockets. Its engineers crafted the B-52 Stratofortress, a bomber that still patrols skies 70 years after its maiden flight. By the 1960s, Boeing was more than an aircraft company. It had become the cornerstone of the American economy and a global leader in aviation. When people thought of flight, they thought of Boeing. Yet this towering reputation would eventually begin to unravel. The shift began in the 1990s when Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas. What followed was not simply a corporate union but a transformation of culture. Also, the engineering-driven ethos that had defined Boeing's golden age gave way to a profit-driven mindset. Soon shortcuts, cost-cutting, and shareholder satisfaction began to matter more than safety or innovation. For a time, Boeing's image of strength masked the cracks forming beneath the surface. The Queen of the Skies still soared, but the seeds of a very different Boeing had already been planted. And when the company's greatest test arrived, those cracks became impossible to ignore. By 2024, the cracks had become very obvious chasms. Boeing posted an $11.8 billion net loss, one of the largest in its history. Since the 737 MAX crisis began in 2019, the company had lost more than $35 billion in cumulative losses. To keep itself afloat, it raised $24 billion in capital in late 2024, but the debt load remained suffocating, and free cash flow had sunk deep into the red. Every delayed delivery meant penalties. Every grounded jet meant lost revenue. Airlines that had ordered new fleets to fuel their growth were left waiting on tarmacs for planes that never arrived. For carriers like United and Ryanair, the cost of delays ran into billions, and their frustration with Boeing spilled into the public. The numbers alone were staggering, but the deeper issue was trust. Investors who had once considered Boeing a pillar of the American stock market now wondered if the company could even survive. Its share price swung wildly with every incident. Credit rating agencies warned of downgrades. And while Boeing sank, Airbus surged. Airbus not only overtook Boeing in deliveries but widened the gap year after year. While Boeing struggled with grounded fleets and red ink, Airbus quietly expanded its production, secured new airline customers, and reaped the benefits of reliability. For Boeing, the financial story was not just about balance sheets, it was about survival. The giant that once dominated the skies now found itself weighed down by debt, grounded by scandal, and in danger of being left behind. The crisis began with tragedy. In October 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 plunged into the Java Sea minutes after takeoff. Less than 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed near Addis Ababa. In total, 346 people lost their lives. Both disasters were traced to a flawed software system on Boeing's new 737 MAX, a system poorly explained to pilots and inadequately tested. The world's regulators grounded the entire MAX fleet in March 2019. For nearly 2 years, Boeing scrambled to fix its design, retrain pilots, and convince airlines it was safe to fly. The company insisted the aircraft was ready to return to service, but the shadow of the crashes never truly lifted. And then came 2024. On January 5, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 suffered an explosive door plug blowout. This time, no lives were lost, but the images of a gaping hole in the side of a brand new aircraft reignited every doubt passengers had about Boeing. Investigators later revealed that critical bolts had been missing, overlooked in production. Whistleblowers had been warning for years that Boeing's quality control was deteriorating. Some raised alarms about assembly shortcuts and retaliation against those who spoke out. Several whistleblowers later died under suspicious circumstances, sparking public concern that went beyond the factory floor. The Federal Aviation Administration responded by capping Boeing's 737 production, demanding a 90-day quality plan and exposing systemic failures across both Boeing and its key supplier, Spirit Aerosystems. At the same time, the 787 Dreamliner came under scrutiny, with reports of falsified inspections and structural flaws in its pressure bulkhead. These were not isolated mistakes. They were part of a pattern that suggested that the company was struggling to uphold safety, which is the very foundation of aviation. For passengers, the thought was chilling. They no longer saw Boeing jets as marvels of engineering, but as question marks in the sky. For airlines, it was worse. The aircraft that they had staked their futures on had become liabilities. And for Boeing, it was not the most painful truth of all. Planes that should never have flown had taken to the air, and the world would not forgive that easily. Inside Boeing's factories, the crisis played out in real time. Assembly lines once known for efficiency descended into chaos. Out-of-sequence work meant aircraft were completed with temporary fixes, only to be dismantled and redone later on at staggering cost. Suppliers faltered too, and Spirit Aerosystems delivered fuselage sections with defects that rippled across production schedules. The pandemic had already strained supply chains, and Boeing's push to catch up only deepened the cracks. Workers who were caught between impossible deadlines and declining morale pushed back. Strikes erupted, demanding safer conditions and a halt to rushed schedules. Many of the most skilled machinists had left during the pandemic, leaving gaps that new hires struggled to fill. Customers were running out of patience. Ryanair lambasted Boeing for repeated delays, while United publicly vented after years of waiting for promised jets. Across the Atlantic, Airbus quietly met delivery targets, widening the gap between the two giants. Boeing's factories, once celebrated as temples of engineering precision, had become visible reminders of dysfunction. Numbers can be repaired, planes can be fixed, but once confidence is lost, it is far harder to regain. Boeing's greatest challenge was not financial, nor even technical, but cultural. Inside the company, employees spoke of a climate where fear replaced transparency. Whistleblowers described a culture in which raising safety concerns meant risking careers. Former quality manager John Barnett warned for years that defective parts were being installed on aircraft and that inspections were rushed or skipped. He later died under troubling circumstances, fueling suspicion that the problems inside Boeing were far darker than simple mismanagement. Others echoed his claims, describing retaliation for speaking out and pressure to look the other way. The disconnect between the factory floor and the executive suite widened into a chasm. Executives in glass towers spoke of efficiency and shareholder returns, while line workers saw bolts missing, fuselages rushed, and corners cut. For many mechanics, the message was unmistakable. Speed mattered more than safety. The world noticed. Regulators imposed tighter oversight, airlines complained loudly, and passengers grew wary of boarding Boeing jets. A company that had once embodied reliability was now viewed with suspicion. Trust, once Boeing's strongest currency, had been squandered, and in the high-stakes world of aviation, confidence is everything. Leadership was supposed to steady the turbulence. Instead, it added to the chaos. Dave Calhoun, brought in as a crisis manager after the MAX disasters, promised to restore stability. But by 2024, his legacy was billions in losses, declining morale, and a reputation in tatters. He announced he would step down, leaving behind a company still searching for direction. Into this storm stepped Kelly Ortberg, a veteran of Rockwell Collins and United Technologies, respected for his engineering-first mindset. He pledged that 2025 would be Boeing's turnaround year. His plan focused on 3 pillars: restoring quality control with new inspections and protocols, rebuilding Boeing's culture to encourage accountability, and rebalancing the company's strained finances. But Ortberg faced immense headwinds, and debt exceeding $50 billion hung over the company. Airlines like Ryanair and United had lost patience, threatening to shift more orders to Airbus. Regulators were still capping production and demanding structural reform. And inside Boeing, mistrust lingered. Could one man reverse years of decay and silence the critics? The challenge ahead was not simply about engineering or economics. It was about redemption. Ortberg's leadership would determine whether Boeing could reemerge as a titan of flight or whether it would remain a grounded giant, remembered more for scandal than for innovation. Boeing's future now hangs in the balance. On the one hand, it remains indispensable. The United States cannot allow one of its 2 aircraft manufacturers to collapse. National security depends on it. Boeing still builds fighter jets like the F-15EX, aerial refueling tankers like the KC-46, and spacecraft through its defense and space divisions. Those contracts, worth tens of billions, guarantee that Boeing will not simply vanish. But survival is not the same as success. Commercial aviation, the core of Boeing's identity, remains in peril. The company lags behind Airbus, which delivers 735 aircraft in 2024 compared to Boeing's 528. Airlines that once relied almost exclusively on Boeing are diversifying, hedging their bets with Airbus orders. Even the United States, once Boeing's safest market, carriers like Delta have turned to Airbus for reliability. Kelly Ortberg, Boeing's new chief executive, insists that 2025 will mark a turning point. He's begun implementing additional inspections, revising supplier oversight, and pledging transparency with regulators. Perhaps most significantly, he has spoken about changing Boeing's internal culture, restoring the voice of engineers, rewarding quality over speed, and breaking down the barriers of fear that silenced whistleblowers for years. Yet promises alone are not enough. Memories of the Lion Air and Ethiopian crashes remain fresh. The haunting image of Alaska Airlines Flight 1282's torn fuselage is still etched into the public's mind. Trust, once lost, is slow to return, and every new incident risks erasing months of progress. Investors demand profitability, airlines demand punctual deliveries, and regulators demand proof that Boeing has changed. Debt looms as a constant reminder of the company's fragility. More than $50 billion weigh on its balance sheet. Any further delays, setbacks, or penalties could push Boeing deeper into the red. For a century, Boeing was synonymous with ambition. Today, it is synonymous with recovery. Boeing once crowned the skies with the Queen. Today, it fights to keep from being reminded as only a grounded giant. Boeing's story is still unfolding, and if you want to keep following stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and tell us where you think the company is headed. Is this the start of a comeback, or are we watching the final chapter of a fallen giant? And if you found this worth your time, hit the like button so more people can join the conversation.